Okay, so welcome, Toon Boom 2. We're going to be talking about just some sort of clerical issues with photo, or not issues, but some clerical information for Toon Boom. How do you get files in? How do you get files out? What would those files look like when they come in? So we'll talk about importing and exporting. We'll talk about the difference between a bitmap graphic and a vector graphic, and what that means for us as we start to work in Toon Boom. So let's start off at the top. We got import and export. So import, obviously, is if you want to bring in something else from outside Toon Boom and bring it into Toon Boom, just like you might open a file in Photoshop to tweak it. Now, when you go to File Open in Toon Boom, it can only open Toon Boom files. That's what Toon Boom does. But if you're adding an image, you're not opening the image, you're importing the image into your Toon Boom scene, right? So under File, Import, there will be many different options, of which we will use some more of these throughout the year, right? But, you know, it says import from scanner, images, 3D models, movie, sound, all that good stuff. So eventually, we might import some sound, you know, for our lip syncs and stuff. Bring in some dialogue. Movie would be like if you're trying to trace over something, you can import a movie and you can just trace over the frames. But for our purposes, I hope they can see my screen. For our purposes, we're just going to import an image. And you can already see where this is going, actually, because I'm in my one that I did last period. But here's the Import Images window. So first you'll choose the image you want with Browse. That's obviously straightforward. So there's this TV Pac-Man maze that I've given you today. And then there are options to create a layer, add to an existing layer, whatever. Typically, you're just going to want to create a new layer and just have it be on its own new layer. Sounds good. Now, it gives us an intriguing question here, of which we will now answer. So it's asking you, do you want to keep this as original bitmap, or would you like to import it as a Toon Boom bitmap drawing? No. Or convert to a Toon Boom vector drawing. So what does that functionally mean for us? We need to answer a simple question. What does bitmap mean? And what does vector mean? Before we can answer that question. So, bitmap graphics are what we are all very familiar with. In fact, I have a very illustrative video to show you how bitmap graphics doesn't work. So this is not how bitmap graphics work.
That at 9:15, Ray Santoya was at the ATM.
So the question is, what was he doing at 9:16?
Shooting the 9mm at something. Maybe he saw the sniper.
Or was working with him?
Right. Go back one.
No. So, let's take a step into Photoshop for a second. Photoshop is primarily a bitmap program. What that means is, if you look at our definition again, whoops, let me flip back to the notes. It means that there's a finite amount of information in that file. So each pixel is a particular color, anywhere from black to white, and any color in between. So when we look at this picture, this is the file I gave you earlier. It is 1600 pixels by 2136 pixels. And so if I zoom in on here, you can see how each of these individual squares of color makes up this shape, makes up this image. That is bitmap graphics. Anything with pixels. Basically anything you've really worked with so far to date. Probably any of your stuff outside. What is vector? So vector we are familiar with as a pen tool path. Pen tool paths are strokes. Are vector. They're vector strokes. You can take your pen tool path and scale it infinitely without getting any jagged edges or anything like that. For us, as we work in Toon Boom, our pencil and brush tool in Toon Boom are vector drawing tools. So when we're using our brush in Photoshop, you can make the size of the brush, bigger and smaller and stuff, and draw whatever. But at the end of the day, when you save that out of Photoshop, you've created a finite amount of pixels colored, whatever color that they are. In Toon Boom, you can go and scale that brush stroke infinitely and not lose any detail. So, if I go back into Toon Boom, and I zoom in here, right, you can see how my picture, if I zoom in real close, you can kind of see, right, the striations in here from the image. If I move over to the left now, no matter how far I zoom in, and I think I am maxed out, I am 80,000% zoomed in, no issue on this edge. In fact, let me zoom out. Let me go to one of the round corners so you can see, no matter how far I zoom in, no jagged pixelated corners, because it's made out of vector. Now, that's one of those things when you're making a new drawing layer. It's going to ask you, do you want to make vector layers or bitmap layers? There is no reason to make bitmap layers in Toon Boom. Now, if you bring in a picture that is bitmap, that's okay. But when you make a new drawing layer, don't make bitmap layers. You're going to make vector layers. That's the default. So, again, hopping back over here. So, bitmap, finite amount of detail. Vector, infinite amount of detail. So, whatever it is that we choose to do with that. Let us discuss briefly, before I skip too far past it, exporting, because this will be relevant to completing yesterday's assignment, right? So let's say I was happy with this this video here. Go to File, Export, and again, many different options, but in our case, we'll choose Movie. Then it'll ask me, hey, how do you want to export this? Many of you, the first time you export as H.264, you will get a notification, unless my first period already installed it on your computer, which some of it did. Some of them it did get installed. H.264, there'll be a little window that says, hey, the codec's not installed. Would you like to install it? Yes is the answer. Yes, we want to install it. When that comes up, it'll come up the first time you export it as H.264. Then it'll ask you, hey, where is this thing going? By default, it will look like this. .mov. That's all it'll say. That is not an output. So you need to hit browse and answer two simple questions. Where is it going? So in my case, I'll put it on the desktop. And what is it named? Leave the .mov. So let's do Meyer. This is third period. And then I'll put name. Cool. .mov. So I'd save. And then last thing to double check. Typically the frame range it'll set is the entirety of your entire timeline, which is fine. But I think it is just a best practice to, when you are not otherwise exporting just a specific range of frames, just make sure you toggle that to all instead of the number of frames. And then after that, it should be all good. Let's hit OK. It's going to render me out a video. And then, it's a single frame, so I'm not going to play it. But and then boom, rendered out video. Now, quick note, obviously, this is a video. This video has finite detail. We have exported the movie files are bitmap in nature, and that they have a finite amount of detail. So even though you made this with vector graphics in Toon Boom, it'll always be vector graphics. You can go back and change and toggle and stretch it out and stuff as you need. But when you render it out, it's finalized, and then it becomes bitmap. So then if I tried to zoom in on this, pixels, right? So now, one thing to note about our vector tools here in Toon Boom. As we lightly touched on yesterday, the tools are mostly based around the concept of our vector stroke. And now we can include that in our description. So I was saying just strokes yesterday. So our vector strokes are either, when it comes to the pencil, the inside line of the shape I make, or for the brush, the vector strokes are the outline of the shape, and then that shape is filled. So let me go back in here, and you can see I have my strokes visible right now in here. So these are pencil shapes here. You can see that the stroke goes, or the outline goes around this stroke, and because it's a pencil, I could also come back in here and adjust it back down if I were so inclined, right? So this is part of the strength of pencil strokes. If I instead had a brush stroke, which let me make sure my size is pretty big for this. Again, you can see, one, if I zoom in, infinite detail, right? I'm at 80,000% again. But also you can see there's that little blue outline around it. That stroke, that vector stroke, is what defines this shape. So let me go ahead and make a circle like this. And here you can see they don't quite touch, right? The strokes, there's a little bit of a gap here, which is why I won't be able to use my paint bucket to fill this in. So if you want to see strokes, by the way, the keyboard shortcut is K. And this is one of those things where you most of the time, you don't even need to know that these are there, right? You'll just do your work. Don't need to worry about the strokes. Every now and then, like when we're making our Pac-Man tomorrow, I think we'll have to do this. Maybe. You just have to actually adjust the strokes, and you might need to go into K and be like, oh, okay, good. These are intersected. I can see that because they got a little blue vertex here. If I zoom in over here, these are my stroke lines from this, and you can see they're all overlapping. So if I wanted to, I could fill in this box. But again, if there's any opening, it's not going to fill, right? So if I wanted to do that, though, let's say I want this area to fill in. I want to get this shape filled in. You can create invisible strokes using the close gap tool. So again, I'm showing you this not because it's something you will use frequently, but because you need to know it's there in case you do need it. So I'm going to show you this thing. You may or may not use it, with the exception of any times I force you to use it for an assignment, which I was going to do one today where you filled up wine glasses, but I don't like the assignment. So okay, so if I want to close a gap, it's right here under the paint bucket, and then I can just drag a line between these two, and you see it draws a straight line connecting these two paths, and then I can paint bucket in here. And obviously that looks like booty because there's no stroke on the outside of this line, so it just looks like a big cutout cavern here. So again, close gap is an emergency solution. It's there in case you need it. Okay, so before I go too much further on this, I'm gonna close this. Don't save. And so we're gonna start from scratch so that everyone can see how today is gonna go, what you're gonna be working on. So, our last things on the notes, which I'll get into in a second, are different types of layers. Now, before I get into that, let's name this properly. So I'm going to name this, third period Pac-Man. Cool. And you'll notice I didn't put my name in that. It's fine right now. You don't need to have your name in your Toon Boom files because those will stay with you for the most part. It's when you export your video. That's when you need to make sure your name is in the file. So if I go back to my render I made earlier, last name Meyer, boom, right there, Meyer 3 name, because it was the name right assignment, technically. So anyway, so I'm in Pac-Man, and I'm going to go import my background. So I just go File, Import, Images, and you're just going to go find the TB2 Pac-Man Maze file. And that you can, of course, find right here. TB2, Pac-Man maze, right here. So, bring that in. Found it. It's in my folder called the drop. And then just, again, default create a layer for it. That's all good. Keep as original bitmap. That's all good. Now, oh, okay, I'll show that in a second, actually. So we got this in here now. And I have a drawing layer above it. So I'm going to rename this drawing layer Maze. And you can see it's very small, and unfortunately I can't really zoom in for you right now. But they have two different little icons next to the layers because these are different types of layers. So some of our most common layers that we'll be using this year. Peg layers, which will be coming up on Thursday when we talk about those. Drawing layers. So again, any vector art you draw in Toon Boom, that's like your default layer type. You're going to be making a lot of drawing layers. Image layers will be whatever pictures you might find yourself bringing into Toon Boom. If you're bringing in reference images to draw for yourself, or in the case of today, we have the reference image of the Pac-Man maze to follow. And then the last one here is a color card, because again, our background is typically, the transparency, so to speak, will render out to black. So if you have black on black, won't be visible. Here's my example from earlier. This is my name. You cannot see my name, but this is my name. It's black on nothing, so it's black on black. So make sure that you have a background. Now, yesterday, I had you folks, just make a layer, a rectangle bigger than the box and just fill it in with color. But we're a little fancier today. I'm going to go to my plus sign menu and add color card. And you'll see that color card fills my whole background with white. The gray boxes are just to represent the scale of this layer. They will not render out in your final video. So let's say the background for this, I'm going to make it a nice lilac. I like that color. Cool. Done. Boom. So now I have this color card as my backdrop. You'll notice it doesn't have any frames or any animation on it, and that's the way it should be. So, cool. Now I'm back on my maze layer. I'm going to use, whoops, see, I'm selected in my timeline. Let me click in here, then zoom in with 2. And the name of the game, folks, is to recreate this maze. Again, you don't need the dots. You won't need the ghosts. You won't need Pac-Man. That's all coming on the next set of notes. So, many ways you could do this. You could use your pencil tool. Okay, that was really crappy. Whoops. Let me make a new color, because obviously I want to make a color, and this will be Maze Outline. Instead of making it black, I'll make it, say, this soft yellow. And so if I have the, I could draw it. Again, those of you with tablets, this might come out a little better, right? I could draw like this, although that looks kind of crap. And then don't forget, if you draw with the pencil, you can always go back and make it a little bigger, right? If it's not big enough. You could also use your brush tool. Similar concept, right? Except you can't scale it after the fact, so make sure your brush size is right before you draw. You could also use a rectangle, right? And then if I wanted to, I could fill this. You could also use the line tool. Right? And holding shift while you do this will keep them straight. You could, any other methods that I'm forgetting? Oh, okay, so another method is to use the rectangle tool. If you wanted to have these, like the little thickness in the wall like this, where it's empty. So like I could do like this, and then like this. this, right? And then I just got to go boom, 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 boom. Or if I wanted these to all, whoops, I could also go in here with my eraser if I wanted. Not the cleanest, but from zoomed out far away, it's hard to tell, right? So that way it could all be one single hollow long path. But whatever way works for you. But this is going to be in your projects category eventually, because this is something we'll work on for both of these notes. And it is going to be graded qualitatively, not just on how you drew your background. So take the time to really make a nice looking maze. It's your version of the maze, your color scheme. If you want to put like, I don't know, flowers, you want to put Genshin characters in the boxes, you want to do whatever. It's your design to make. So, but you're just going to be drawing on a different drawing layer, making a copy of your maze on a color card so that at the end you can turn it off and you'll have maze on background. So you'll make a color card to choose your background color. You'll trace the maze over the top of the original image, right? And then that way at the end the eyeballs, same thing as Photoshop on-off visibility. So you can then turn that off at the end, and you'll see how your maze looks on your backdrop. Questions, comments, concerns, folks? Okay, lovely. So I am going to stop the